My name is Johan Sandin. I'm a co-founder and CSO at Alzecure Pharma, and I'm going to talk about the clinical development plan that we have for our lead compound in the NeuroRestore platform, ACD856. But let me start by showing the pipeline slide that Martin showed earlier on, showing our 3 different product platforms with NeuroRestore on top and its 2 drug candidates, with ACD856 being the lead drug candidate, which is currently in clinical phase 1 studies. Now, as you can see, there are multiple indications listed for ACD856. So how is this? Well, this is due to the fact, to the biological mechanism that we're actually targeting. So in the brain consists of a huge network of interconnected nerve cells that transmit information through electrical impulses. And the actual transmission of the information occurs at specific sites, so-called synapses. Now, in disorders such as Alzheimer's, there is a dysfunction of this system causing a disruption of neuronal communication and cognitive function. Now, NeuroRestore binds to specific sites in the synapse and enhances synaptic communication and thereby also cognitive function. Now, as we heard Pontus mention earlier, we're targeting neurotrophin signaling. And neurotrophins such as NGF and BDNF, they bind to the respective TRAC receptor and mediate important functions within the cell, such as supporting neuronal function, neuronal communication, cell survival, and neuroprotection. Now, we heard Maria mention earlier on that in disorders such as Alzheimer's disease, these systems become dysfunctional. And the role of NeuroRestore compounds such as ACD856 is to enhance TRAC receptor-mediated signaling, thereby increasing neuronal cell communication, which we showed in preclinical experiments, but also, importantly, improve cognitive function, which we've shown in several different preclinical models, as Pontus showed earlier on. So it's no surprise that ACD856 is aimed as a cognitive enhancer in the clinical studies. Now, we heard Maria mention earlier on as well, there's a strong scientific support for neurotrophin signaling and cognitive function. And there's also this interesting genetic linkage to both cognitive function and disease. This genetic variation or polymorphism in the BDNF gene, called the Val66 MET polymorphism, is quite prevalent. It's about 35% of all Caucasians do have it. And the net result is a 30% reduction of BDNF secretion. Now, if these individuals develop Alzheimer's disease, what scientists have seen is that you see an increased rate of cognitive decline and increased rate of hippocampal atrophy, i.e. disease progression. So indicating that BDNF certainly plays an important role in the brain's ability to withstand the effects of pathological processes such as those in Alzheimer's disease. Now, NeuroRestore enhances neurotrophin signaling and could therefore have a positive effect on both neuronal and cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease. Now, this genetic linkage to disease, to cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease, it's not only associated with Alzheimer's disease, but also cognitive dysfunction associated with traumatic brain injury, with Parkinson's disease, with sleep disorders. There is this linkage to this genetic polymorphism. So there are multiple indications that are possible for this project, which makes it a really interesting target. Also, as we heard Maria mention earlier on, there are also other indications that could be potential indications for this specific biological mechanism, such as depression, where it's received quite a lot of attention recently from a Cell paper. Now turning over to the clinical development program for ACD856. This slide shows you the phase 1 studies, which includes the traditional or classical single ascending and multiple ascending dose studies, but also we also conducted a PK study. And this study was initiated in the end of 2019, according to plan, and also we received the data in mid-2020. The primary objective of this study was to determine the pharmacokinetic profile of the compound in man, as well as to assess the tolerability and safety of this given drug. Now, the data came out showing that 856 was well tolerated and had a suitable pharmacokinetic profile for further clinical development. So that was really good news. And we then moved on with the next part of the study, which was the single ascending dose. This study it contained 50 healthy subjects with a primary aim to look at safety and tolerability after single administration and also assess metabolism and excretion in man. Now, this study was initiated in the end of 2020 according to plan, and it's currently ongoing. We just recently released a press release that we have now been able to continue and do an even higher dose and reach higher exposures in man, which is really positive, as well as that can lead to potentially also increased therapeutic window for the compound. So that's moving along according to plan. We also then have the multiple ascending dose study, which contains then 30 volunteers with the primary aim to look again at safety and tolerability after repeated dosing. Here we also have included early signals of target engagement in the CNS by using quantitative EEG. And this is planned to start in the second half of this year. And we also press released about this earlier this week, that we have received all the regulatory approvals to start the MAD clinical phase 1 study according to plan. So this is also moving ahead. We, subsequent to this, we plan to start what we call signal detection studies. So these are studies to look at early efficacy signals. And here we are using participants that are subjected to a cognitive challenge. So the aim here is to look at early effects on cognition. We do so because we believe this is a strong value driver for the project, showing these kind of early efficacy signals. And we have designed these studies in collaborations with key opinion leaders in the field and chosen models that are relevant for the specific indications that we have listed for 856. The models we'll be looking at is scopolamine, and we heard earlier Maria mentioned about the cholinergic dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease, and also Pontus mentioning the scopolamine model that we've done in the preclinical studies. So this model is certainly relevant for the Alzheimer's disease indication, but also provides a translation of the results from the preclinical studies. We are also doing a model called sleep deprivation. This is a proof of concept study for the sleep disorder indication. But importantly, it's also an important, sleep impairment is also an important cofactor of cognitive impairment, also in Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, and could open doors in these indications and in addition to the sleep disorder indication. Now looking at the long-term clinical development plans, I think the possibility of the different indications, of the multiple indications that I talked about earlier on, provides a really interesting scenario for 856. Obviously, Alzheimer's disease is in there, but I think there are also other cognitive disorders, such as sleep disorders, sleep apnea, insomnia, that could be cost-effective and feasible first indication for a small company such as ours. And there are also potential other secondary indications for the compound, such as cognitive dysfunction of the TBI or cognitive impairment in Parkinson's disease. Now here listed is also phase 3 studies, and obviously that's not the primary objective of Alzecure, as we intend to out-license or partner before that, as Martin indicated before. Now to summarize, ACD856 enhances neurotrophic signaling. So this is a biological system that we've heard plays a really important role in cognitive processing. There are multiple indications that are supported by this mechanism of action. We have a strong preclinical pharmacology package that we heard Pontus talk about earlier on. We have conducted the first clinical study. The PK study showed a good profile appropriate for further clinical development. And we're currently conducting the single ascending dose where we now received approval to go even higher up in exposure. And we plan to start the next clinical study, the multiple ascending dose, according to plan during the second half of this year. And we have in our clinical development plan also these kind of early signal detection studies to look at early efficacy, which we believe is a strong value driver for the project. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.